we're about 48 hours removed now from the news breaking during our live show that Brian Kelly was getting fired at LSU. And it didn't take me by surprise. We had a little heads up that it was coming. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. And as it turns out, it happened 3 minutes after we went on air. And so we broke the news here. Well, we ourselves didn't break it, but it broke on our show. And then we discussed it and reacted to it and all that stuff. So everyone's had an opinion on this. This is one of those that affected everyone. I don't care if you're a Washington State fan or an FAU fan. You had a take on Brian Kelly. And I have looked at it and I've asked myself, what in the world are we learning from this? Like, I still think, I'll talk about this in a second, I still think the way that the ABC broadcast handled the fourth quarter had a ton to do. Not ultimately with whether Brian Kelly was going to get fired, but the rapid nature of how quickly he got fired the next day. So there's been a lot made of whether you have to fit at LSU or not. And, he wasn't a good fit. And I do agree he wasn't a good fit. So that's part one of where maybe I whiffed a little bit, but I never really thought the fit for Brian Kelly at LSU was about what most people think fitting at LSU means. If we're just calling it like it is, most people think fitting at LSU means being from the South. That's an outsider's view of what it takes to fit at LSU. That's never been what it takes to fit at LSU because Nick Saban wouldn't have fit there. Nick Saban fit there because he was a really hard worker. Nick Saban fit there because he leaned into what makes Louisiana great. And I don't mean great from a cultural perspective even. I mean what makes it a great place to be a college football coach. He leaned into that. He hired at an elite level. This is going to be a theme throughout this coaching search, by the way, so just get used to me talking about that. And he recruited. And that's not in exact order. Recruiting probably could have been first and foremost. He went and got really good players. And when you get really good players, then you surround them with an elite coaching staff and you work really hard and you embrace Louisiana, you tend to win. And if you win at LSU or anywhere else, they're going to embrace you. And you know what all of a sudden you find yourself doing? Fitting. You fit. You fit, and you could use a French accent for all I care. You could speak Portuguese down there, and people need subtitles. They needed subtitles with Orgeron anyway, and he didn't speak Portuguese. You fit if you win at LSU. It helps if you're not a total douchebag to everyone. Yes, that greatly helps, but I have a sneaking suspicion that if Brian Kelly kept his exact personality traits, but he had done things other than have Matt House on his initial staff and done things other than hang out in an entirely another state on important recruiting weekends, if he had leaned into Louisiana, I think he would have worked out okay, but he didn't do any of those things, so he's out. So I have made a promise on this show. We've done this show since 2020. That's when we first came to Nashville. We first, at the time, partnered with 24/7 Sports, then CBS. Now I own the show entirely, and we have partnerships with many different people in many different companies. But I've always maintained the stance to you guys that I would hold the show to a really high standard. And there have been a few instances in the past where I just had to go on air and I had to admit that I was very, very badly wrong about something. Now, I was trying to think earlier today, because I normally like to wipe this from my memory. So earlier today, I was thinking, what was the last glaring example of when I had to go on air? I don't mean predicting a game wrong or anything like that. I mean like pounding my fist on the table. Ironically, like Brian Kelly. Pounding my fist on the table. I believe something, almost speaking down to people who disagree with it, and I ended up being wrong. And I think last year, Jesse, I was really confident that the spring transfer portal was just going to go nuts. Because I had been told by a couple of people I trusted, hey, get ready, man, spring transfer portal is going to be crazy. And it wasn't. It wasn't. And I was really emphatic about it, and it didn't happen, so I just had to own it. And there have been a couple of other times where I've had to come on the show similarly. Hopefully it doesn't happen very often, but like once or twice a year, we really just have to admit that we screwed up. So Brian Kelly a few years ago gets hired at LSU from Notre Dame. And a few years ago, I just a little backstory, I had thought Brian Kelly would fit in the SEC for a long time. Back in 2015, when the Georgia job was open, I was rooting for Georgia to go after Brian Kelly. Now, of course, it was Kirby Smart's job. So Kirby gets the job, all's well that ends well for Georgia. But I always looked at Brian Kelly and I always thought he feels a lot like what these Southern coaches feel like. I wonder how he'd work down here. So I already had that as like this default setting in my mind. But then he got so deep into his career, I just thought the time had passed. So, the LSU job comes open, and I think I went on an LSU message board and I kind of said, hey man, in my perfect world, you guys would go get Brian Kelly. But I don't really think that that's in the cards anymore. So, you move on, you start throwing around other names. Well, it turns out LSU went and hired Brian Kelly. So I was just ecstatic for LSU folks. I was over the moon excited because I thought that they had really killed the hire. And I spoke about it pretty emphatically. And I said some things back then in 2021 that have recently, suspiciously, resurfaced in the form of screenshots on the internet. Now, a lesser man would duck these allegations entirely, but it's kind of hard to duck it when it's just right there. It's not AI, it's not Photoshopped or Adobe Photoshopped, as Jordan Hudson would say. No, it's the real thing. So anyone out there trying to defend my honor, thank you, but it's not fake. And if you're listening on podcast, my eyes are closed because that's how ashamed I am of what I'm about to have to do. But we've done it 3 or 4 times on the show throughout history, and I've got to do it at least once more. When you do clown things, you have to atone for those things. And around here on the Pate State campus, the way we atone for clown behavior is I've got to put on the clown nose like such. And for those of you who wonder what this post on the message board sounded like, let me take you back to November 29th, 2021, 8:04 p.m. I'm excited. LSU has just hired Brian Kelly, and I say the following. We discussed this name on this very message board several weeks back, and I told you he'd be my ideal candidate, but I never believed it was possible. Apparently it was possible. If Scott Woodward closes this, it's beyond a Grand Slam hire. I have listened to the doubters and have yet to hear a logical reason why LSU folks shouldn't be over the moon excited about the hire. I continue. Notice my professionalism and persistence here. Brian Kelly has essentially been trying to Brian Kelly has essentially been trying to compete in the Daytona 500 with a Prius. Given the limitations at Notre Dame relative to college football's Tier 1 programs. To even have them consistently in the college football playoff conversation has been incredible. If you want to know how incredible it was, keep an eye on the program once he leaves. Can I finish? Okay, I'm done. Hey, wait just a second. I appreciate you guys watching. Most of you are subscribed. If you're not, please do so. It's free. It helps us keep the show free, and that's how we do college football year-round. All right, back to the video. Take your screenshots. I deserve it. I said it. I own it. And it was what it was, and all I can do is learn from it. In retrospect, did I view the situation a little incorrectly? It seems that I did. It seems that I missed a thing or two. Now, here is what I think about it. I wouldn't have done this had there not been anyone warn me, but several of my Notre Dame folks warned me. Now, at the time, I listened to them, and I thought it was sour grapes. Because truthfully, 2021, I hadn't been doing this very long. I have very little insight into the inner workings of Brian Kelly's Notre Dame. So I kind of know what the outsiders know and nothing more. But there were people on the ground around Notre Dame football who knew exactly who Brian Kelly was and what he was about. And they talked for quite a while about some of the same criticisms. They had them about him there that folks at LSU started to have about him at LSU. I, the other night, went in on him pretty hard, and I was leveling some of the same criticism. Some of the Notre Dame folks were listening and saying, oh, we were saying that like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Yeah, I just didn't buy it. So they were right on that. I was wrong on that. I had to learn it the hard way. I mean, there is no harder way to learn something than wearing a clown nose on your own show and reading posts of yours on message boards from 4 years ago. But I was convinced that he had tapped Notre Dame out. And I was convinced of that because Brian Kelly did a pretty good job in the subsequent years of convincing me, other people too, that he had kind of had Notre Dame redlining. Like the way Brian Kelly presented his time at Notre Dame, it was he had his foot all the way down on the floor, and he was absolutely maximizing the potential of that place. And if you looked around, you could use certain context clues, and you could think to yourself, oh, wow, man, now the way recruiting is, all the Southern schools out-recruit a lot of the Northern schools, and maybe Notre Dame's academic admissions requirements and where it is geographically, maybe their time is just past, and maybe Brian Kelly really is maximizing that place. But then Marcus Freeman happened. And since Marcus Freeman has been there, they've recruited better. Like they've leveled up in recruiting. Now, to be fair to me, because I need it right now, I said that before Freeman got hired, although I still thought it like after Freeman got hired. So I probably, if I'm thinking back correctly to 2021, it's not like when Marcus got hired or he got named the head coach, I said, oh, never mind, I take it all back. I didn't do that. But it wasn't a shot at Marcus Freeman. It was just my view of the Notre Dame program at the time. So my view of the Notre Dame program is obviously radically changed. Never hated Notre Dame. That's one accusation I'll push back on pretty hard because I actually have a very, 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 very fond spot in my heart for Notre Dame. They don't believe that, Jesse. I'm going to move on. I actually do, though. But it wasn't Marcus Freeman doubt. It was Notre Dame doubt. I should have been doubting Brian Kelly, and I doubted Notre Dame instead. So that was where I was on that. Now, in the subsequent years, it took about 2 years in for me to change my tune on this show about Brian Kelly. But I didn't do it overnight. I didn't make some proclamation. What happened was I started to get feedback about Brian Kelly at LSU because I know way more people at LSU than I do Notre Dame. So I started to get more feedback that led me to take a step back, look at the situation and say, hold on now. I thought I was getting a guy that was going to grind. I thought I was getting a guy that was going to go all in. I thought I was getting a guy that took the LSU job because he wanted to do the same things there that Nick Saban did once a generation ago when he took the job. And that was not the feedback I started to get at all. And I don't really care who you are. If you're not doing what it takes to win at LSU, you're not going to win at LSU. It's the most common sense stance that you could possibly have. And that's when I cooled on him. And then, the staffing decisions he made at the outset were very bad. Subsequently, they're terrible defensively. And then I think there was sort of a come to Jesus moment or several moments behind the scenes where it was dictated to him in no uncertain terms, you're going to make these changes. And then changes were made. And then there were guys that came back in the building, with a little more understanding of LSU. And the nose started to get pulled up a little bit. But anyone who watches the show or listens to the show closely noticed I never gave credit to BK. I gave credit to LSU. I called it organizational moves because they were organizational moves. But it really was never going to happen because the guy was never all in to the degree that it takes for the head coach to be at LSU to win. So that ended Sunday night. I still wonder, though. I'm going to talk about the coaching search later in the show. We got a lot of games to predict. I still wonder, because one of the great questions I've been asked like 20 times since Sunday is, do you think if they didn't get blown out Sunday night, that he would have been fired Sunday? Or if they didn't get blown out Saturday night, would he have been fired Sunday? I don't know. But I will always think back. The lasting image I'll have in my mind of that game is how the fourth quarter played out. I'm not saying ABC was complicit in this at all. ABC put on a clinic on how you broadcast a game and you truly capture the moment. Like, I think they did a phenomenal job of capturing the actual vibe. They did a great job of documenting the critical storylines around the game. And since it's a blowout in the fourth quarter, places emptying out. And so it's basically like part infomercial for Texas A&M taking place on your field, and all your donors are witnessing it in person, and all your fans are having to sit through it at home. And then there are like ISO shots on Brian Kelly, and everyone looks miserable, and he looks miserable. And there are ISO shots on the few remaining LSU fans in the crowd, and they're all holding up, "Fire Brian Kelly, Kelly's got to go." And then the way the game ended, and you don't have any focus on anything for 15 plus minutes other than how bad it is. And that, I think that pushed it over the top if it wasn't already pushed over the top. Not to mention how contentious it reportedly got the next morning in the building. So we'll talk about the coaching search later in the show. I don't care what coach is hired. I have forever changed my viewpoint on hiring because of this. I want to know what staff you're bringing with you, which has always mattered. I just think so often in college football vernacular, we talk about coaching hires and we grade coaching hires based on which head coach they landed. I don't care. I don't care. Truth be told, there are about 20 or 30 head coaches in college football that would win at LSU with the right staff and doing it the right way. And actually, that's not the science. The science is not hiring the head coach. The science is hiring the head coach with the right staff behind him. That's the whole secret here, and it's not really a secret.